We need to get. Okay, I'm gonna admit everybody. Are you good to tell people to wait?
Just give me a. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to take another few minutes just for a few other people to join us. So thank you for coming today, and we are going to begin in another few minutes.
Okay, welcome everybody. My name is Daniel Van Sant. I am the Director of Disability Policy here at the Harkin Institute, and I'm excited to kick off our conversation today. So for people here in person, if this is your first time, you can find me in the room for any questions about restroom, any of that. Just let me know. For people online, we trust you can take care of those things wherever you are, but we're excited that you joined us. If you're not familiar with the Harkin Institute, we are based at Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. We were founded by Senator Harkin when he retired and continue on his legislative work. So in addition to disability policy, we also work in retirement security, wellness, nutrition, and labor and employment as well. So if this is your first time with us, we hope it's the first of many engagements with the Institute. If you are returning as part of this session or another, welcome back to Content from the Harkin Institute. Before we get started, I wanted to make sure people know of another event that we have coming up. Our flagship disability rights program is our Harkin Summit that will take place in Washington, D.C. this year, December 18th and 19th. So for people in room, we've got these bookmarks that you're able to take with you before you leave today. And for people online, I will put the QR code up by the camera. Feel free to scan the QR code here. I will pause for just a minute to learn more information about our conference. And of course, you can email us to find out more. We are running a little bit late, which is totally fine here in disability world, but I want to make sure that we get started as close to time as possible. So it's my honor to welcome Brad Biren to our presentation today. If you've been following this series, you'll know that this is now maybe the fourth time that we've had Brad speaking, and it will be the fourth of many. So feel free to join our future CLE discussions. I also want to thank, we had a sponsor today that has made this free and open to the public, as well as covering the CART captioning that you'll see on your Zoom screen or here in person. So thank you to that sponsor, making it available to everybody. And if you out there in Zoom land or in the room are interested in sponsoring future events to make these free and open to the public, please reach out to me, Daniel Van Sant, at the Harkin Institute. With that, I will pass the microphone and camera over to Brad to kick off our discussion about inclusive boards of directors. Thank you, Brad.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, everyone. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that's on the precipice of really expanding and getting people to think differently in terms of how to engage with their communities, how to interact with them, and also how to possibly become more profitable and find other opportunities. And we're doing that through something known as inclusion. That means bringing people in of different perspectives, and in particular, people with disabilities. I myself am a disabled person. This is something that is new for me the last 4 years. And although I taught special education and my family was instrumental in the special education system in New York City, these last few weeks putting together this presentation in particular has taught me a great deal. So with that vulnerability, I welcome you to the conversation and hope that you also share this learning opportunity. As a disclaimer, oops. So having a little trouble going through the next slide. The little panels on the bottom. So the next slide, of course, is going to be the legalese, as all CLEs must be. The disclaimer we wanted to bring up, of course, is that this presentation is intended for educational and generalized purposes versus one-on-one personal legal advice. In addition, it's important to keep in mind that these are really general rules, and every nonprofit, every individual specific needs should be reviewed with an attorney before anyone takes any actions that could harm their access to rights and may increase their obligations. And lastly, my views represent mine alone. I am the presenter. It does not represent my employer, the state of Iowa, or Harkin Institute. And with that, I would like to give the first three numbers of our CLE code. And the first three numbers are 413. So a little bit about myself. I don't like to spend too much time on that because this is not the meat and potatoes. I have a lot of experience in the community and a good education. Moving forward. What makes disability rights such an important and prescient feature of our community specific to Iowa? So something that was very shocking to me was when I began this research, I had an idea that disability was of course pervasive within our community, not as anything negative, but I wasn't exactly sure of the percentages. And so I was very shocked to learn that 1 in 4, actually a little bit more, 26% of Iowans are people that have a disability or recognize themselves as disabled. If we look at the under 65 population, that's about 1 in 9 people, or 11.1%. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, do our boards represent our communities? It's important that our boards represent our communities, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later on. So now, disabled folks bring a great deal of different perspectives. They have connections with other resources in the community, and they help raise what's known as human capital. And disabled individuals don't just bring new ideas and don't just exist. They also are engines of opportunity and prosperity and profit. So in particular, 35% in 2017 of all dollars spent on healthcare, about almost $18,000 then, which is equivalent to about $22,000 now, on people with disabilities. And that's very important to consider how much money is out there in terms of you're a for-profit or non-profit. Either way, money is flowing and it can be used to support your community. So disability is intersectional, and that's a very new phrase in the last 10 years. What does intersectionality mean? It means that we all carry with us multiple identities. I'm not just a disabled person. I am also someone who is a child of an immigrant. I'm also someone XYZ. And we want to consider all those multiple facets. Being disabled is not one single all-consuming identity. While doing this research, something really popped out at me. It was the fact that in all of this disability law, all of the legalese, the word permanent did not show up in any rule from federal, Social Security, state law, whatever you can find. So what really took caught my interest was a phrase that Daniel Van Zandt had said to me. He said, disability is a fact of life. So if we recall that disability is a permanent and it's a fact of life, we're all going to be someone at some point who has a disability. Disability includes remission from cancer. It includes a temporary impairment of one's ability to adhere to their activities of daily living. Also, to consider the magnitude of dollars we're talking about, we hear 13 trillion, we hear billions, we hear millions. To give everyone a perspective of the orders of magnitude we're talking about, 1 million seconds equals about 12 days. 1 billion seconds equals about 32 years. 1 trillion seconds equals to about 31,000 years and change. So when we see that there's $13 trillion of spending power, billions of dollars in disposable income, we have a great deal of opportunity there. Moving on, we're going to look a little bit more about the identity and perspectives that are so important to this topic of diversity and inclusion, of disability and inclusion. So if we look at bullet point number 3, are you an interested member of the community? So we're looking at 45 to 52% of the population of just Des Moines identifies as having a disability or can be classified as having a disability under the age of 65. That might sound almost too hard to believe, but we have to consider something. Rural areas may not have resources, therefore more urban areas will likely have higher populations. So that is an asset for your organization if you're considering disability inclusion. There's also things to consider: identity. A disabled person and a caregiver will have different perspectives on the same topic. I am not a caregiver, but I'm a disabled person. If we think just a brief amount of time, what it would be like to be a caregiver versus the actual person who is disabled, we have the same topic, but very different perspectives, and both are very valuable to have on our boards. Moving on, let's ask ourselves, what's our perspective of motivation, why it matters? So if you're new to the organization or you're a veteran of its work, what are you bringing in terms of perspective? Are you interested in change making, or are you interested in maintaining a status quo? These are two very different things, but your experience is still very useful. And with that, when you join an organization, if your idea is not the one chosen, it does not mean you as an individual are not appreciated. It means that in a collaborative work environment, your perspectives were still considered. I'd like to just take a moment on bullet number 2, disabled veterans. We spoke about intersectionality. Disabled veterans have an incredible amount of intersectionality. Some people call it hyper intersectionality. The reason for this is that they were able-bodied people prior to a disabling event. So they had an identity prior to their accident. They have this identity afterwards. They're learning, they're going through something, and they tend to have more complex impairments, mental, physical, emotional. And they also pull from different demographics that are typically not within the wheelhouse of a disability-focused nonprofit or a community nonprofit or any sort of board of directors. So I highly recommend considering tapping into the disabled veteran community. Now, can you answer the following questions about your own organization? What are the demographics of your current board of directors? What is your organization doing to improve inclusion? Now, do 1 in 4 people on your board personally represent the interests of the disabled people within your community? It could be a disabled person. It could also be a caregiver. It could be a sibling. It could be a loved one. We're not saying the person has to be disabled, but the interest of the disabled people has to be there on the board. Now, do your corporate investors and sponsors have folks with disabilities on their boards? Because we want to have this continuity of message. We want to also learn from those we're working with, because it turns out we can also share information among one another and therefore move forward from that. It's important to keep in mind that COVID punctuated a timeline in human history and disability. So by September of 2020, we had a prediction of 129,000 additional disabled people added just to the state of Iowa. That has been blown out of the water. And we can see this because pre-COVID, the disability rate was between 7 and 17.9%. And now that we are at a little over 25%, clearly COVID has had an impact on disability, something to consider. So in this research, I want to focus on this last statement, on this thesis that when an organization is reflective of their communities, their outcomes are more effective, efficient, and dollars go farther. So we want to have an organization and board that is reflective of the community. Without authentic connections to the community, nonprofit services are less effective, and ultimately the community and its people suffer. Less effective can be stated in a different form. For a for-profit company, that means we're not reaching KPIs, the return on investment is lower, and even though we saw a lower beta or risk, we're seeing that we're not getting that return. And if you have an MBA card bingo, I'll also say Scrum and Agile, just in case. That's an attempt at humor with using phrases like KPIs in the nonprofit world. Boards whose members reflect their organizations and communities can reflect their communities in many different ways that help them become more inclusive. So one of the things to consider is the uniqueness of the US military is fascinating. So it has been understood that when the military reflects the population in what it looks like, people will trust the military more. In this country, we have a very high, unusually high trust in the military. And the reason for that is the people there look like us. They're our families, they're part of our community. There are countries with highly exclusionary militaries, so there is enormous distrust. And that's just an example of reflecting one's community. As a stakeholders trust people that appear more relatable. Keep that in mind. If they can see someone that they see as comfort, they will bring their ideas more readily to you and more readily trust what you are doing with the community. Okay, and this is the part that makes a continuing legal education. Statutes and laws, fun, right? So we are going to go over today just the ADA definition because of just for the sake of time. It is the one that has the broadest umbrella over so many different people in different cities, different states. It's really the one unifying factor besides Social Security. I do have the information on Iowa's definitions, Social Security's definitions. The purpose of this slide, though, is to consider that no matter what you do, be consistent in your definition of a disabled person when considering board inclusion. So, for example, you do not have to follow any of these definitions. Now, if you employ someone, do you have to adhere to those protections and compliance? Absolutely. But it's up to your organization to consider what a disability is. And if you, once you choose that, try and stick with it. It'll help you narrow your message and also be more effective in presenting it. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, also known as the ADA, is a federal law that protects the civil rights of people with disabilities. This next part is very important. The ADA does not provide benefits or services. Instead, the ADA protects people with disabilities in the United States from discrimination. To be protected under the ADA, a person must meet its legal definition of disability and be qualified. Determining whether you are a person with disabilities under the ADA is very, very challenging. For this slide and the next, I pulled direct quotations from this fantastic organization that explains this, and they did it so well. I did what every attorney does and reproduce their slides, because if they said it well, I'm not going to reword it. So now, with a disability as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. If we parse this apart, which could take hours, courses are taught, degrees are focused on disability law, but let's just focus a quick moment on some some words to focus on. Physical or mental impairment. So physical is easier to understand, it's corporeal. Mental includes emotional, psychological, things that still can substantially limit one's major life activities. Substantially is an important word. What is a major life activity? Has a history or record of an impairment, such as cancer that is in remission, happen, or do you have such an impairment that others would consider a disability to any sort of major life activity? The next slides, I'm going to keep up just in order to have it in the recording. I highly recommend everyone take a few minutes to go through Iowa's definition of disability. If you notice very quickly, it has a strange circuitousness to it, and that is the the definition of disability in Iowa is substantial disability. So yes, it does take a little bit of digging in there. This is another important code that section that I think people should consider, not only for insurance purposes, for everything that exists here. Quickly, Iowa is a strict liability state when it comes to dog attacks and everything like that. What this statute does is take strict liability off of a service animal and puts them back into typical negligence test. So it's not 100% immunity, but it's something that's very useful when considering service animals. Social Security definition, I'm going to leave up here. It is much stricter, but when you read through it, it helps you understand that having a disabling event has to overlap with the time period that you're unable to work. And that's the core gist of that. Yes, we sped through that. Please ask questions, engage with us, write us email, ask us questions, raise your hand in the presentation. We are going to do our best to answer all questions. This is quite a long and dense presentation, so we're going to try and do our best. How should we address people with disabilities? Recently, I'm facing that. I have no idea how to address myself, and I'm learning about that. And what's wonderful about the staff of the Harkin Institute is that they don't make you feel guilty for trying different words and explaining the history of it. And I'm so grateful that I can engage with their resources. So much like pronouns, the individual person should be asked how to address their disability. We must preserve the dignity of a disabled person by acknowledging all of their nuances and intersectionalities. So there's so many different ways to describe oneself. You can be tall, you can be Catholic. I have this example of someone who grew up in Puerto Rico. There are so many different parts of them that make them a human being, not just the fact that they're disabled. Also consider that being disabled is not a bad word. Being disabled is not a negative thing. It is not mutually exclusive to be both disabled and being a high achiever. You can achieve and attain any goal, and you can be disabled. So we really shouldn't be too kid-gloved about the words we use, such as diversely abled, such as saying special need. There's certain nomenclature we have to just be careful about that is more inclusive. And that also takes away the stigma of the fact that some of us are disabled. So some of us have invisible disabilities, and this is very important. It has come into the cultural zeitgeist quite quickly. So for example, my niece has celiacs. You wouldn't know it. She's a 6-foot-tall 13-year-old that plays baseball. So she's physically capable, all of these different things, but when all the kids celebrate to have cake, she has her own separate one. So there's also mental illness, there's diabetes, who knows what has what. It makes you realize, though, we need to think more inclusively. What does disability mean? It's not just people with visual impairments or people on the autism spectrum. It's also people that have chronic illnesses that need accommodations that bring a new perspective, possibly to your board. So more inclusive words to encourage engagement. Disabled person or person with disability. Those two things commit to dignity and acknowledgement and do not make the person feel like they are less than. It simply acknowledges a nuance of them. The third component is neurodivergent. That is something very new. Some people prefer to identify as neurodivergent, neuroatypical, autistic on the spectrum. Some people like to call themselves autists or autistics. That is still a developing conversation. So returning to our thesis, why have a diversely abled person on your board? So the outcomes of inclusion are fantastically interesting when you dig into some of the metadata. Nobody wants high turnover. It costs so much money to find people and to get people to say. And recently at the Iowa Nonprofit Association, we learned that turnover at nonprofits is between 30 and 40% given the quarter. But for the most part, we're looking at about a third turnover each year, which is very high. The value of inclusion, though, spans both nonprofit and for-profit boards of directors. So representation increases community engagement with the organization when different communities can see that they have a seat at the table. They are welcome. They are invited. They are free to bring their advice and ideas. Each organization will say that they have spent $5,000, $10,000, $25,000 on a private consultant to tell them how to help fix something simple. Or we could just start having greater inclusion on our board of directors. So this is a really strange conversation I've heard people discuss that makes me a little bit uncomfortable because they use the term, how do we find the right disabled person? And it sounds so highly political, but also enormously dehumanizing. It focuses on something known as tokenization. Tokenization is when you have a single person that will represent every other member of the community with that one characteristic. So saying that you have a token disabled person is not a positive thing. We want to move away from tokenization because it's not optimal. It doesn't consider all the different potentials and opportunities that a disabled person can bring. So how do we prevent tokenization? So tokenization occurs when a group chooses an individual, like I said, to be that standard bearer. And could you imagine anything less pressure or just intense than every question about disability? So what are you thinking? I don't know. I don't have that disability. Do you still want me to have an answer? It's just, why put all the onus on one person? Why put them in all the material that's marketing? First, understand the person, because we're looking for a good fit for your board, not a nice face for marketing. We want utility. So for an example of this is having a single disabled person on your board to say, you have a disabled person, disabled representation. That's pure tokenization. There's no discussion of the benefits, the value included statements, and why you're doing it. So the goal is to identify the perspective or skill that you are missing on the board of directors. And that's how you choose anyone. For hiring boards of directors, it doesn't matter. And that's what we really should be focusing on. How do you identify the perspective or skill that you are missing on your board of directors? What is the organization's mission? I worked for a nonprofit in central Pennsylvania, and I was the business director there as well as the development director. We noticed that the majority of people who were making connections in terms of human capital were doing it at ad hoc moments, elevators, grocery stores. So we put the information about the mission on a business card that we laminated and can fit in your wallet. So you could just whip it out and read it. And that's how easily an organization should know their mission. If you understand your mission, you understand what you are searching for in terms of perspectives and skills of the people you want to include. What is the role of the board of directors? That's very important. It is written down in your founding documents that you've filed with the Secretary of State in Iowa. So these are true legal documents. How well can existing board of directors members explain the mission and goals? So it's important that everyone can have bullet points in their minds when looking for others. And we want to ask ourselves, do we have formal roles and responsibilities of each member? Do we have basic expectations that are separate from the roles? For example, someone can have a specified role of doing the accounting on the board or being a board secretary. But is there an unspoken rule about each person has to bring $5,000 maybe to a donation? Is there something about, and any of those considerations that should be part of this calculation. Now, how do we bring more stakeholders to the table to assist the board? And that's what we're really trying to do. We want to improve board outcomes because boards give directions of the mission. Now, what is the mission statement? The board mission statement, here's a definition via questions. What is the mission statement in a sense of what is your purpose? Why are you here? Why am I giving you money? Why am I talking to you? When was the last time it was updated? Something to consider. It just came up right now recently. The purpose of NATO was to stop the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union stopped existing. Why didn't NATO stop existing the next day? Sounds like I'm getting into politics, but it's an important point. What do we do with our mission if the community changes? What do we do with our mission if we're focused on elderly people or senior citizens, but our community is becoming younger and younger? So we have to figure out how to adjust, how to understand our mission and our relativity. Now, for nonprofit considerations, it is important to consider the process for altering your mission statement. You may need to have a board vote. There might need to have consensus and a quorum. This is even more important for for-profit boards. Do shareholders or other executives need to agree to a change in mission and role of the board of directors? If you do not do this, you can get into some serious trouble with people like the SEC, not necessarily the IRS, but we just don't want people with big sticks knocking down our doors trying to say we did something wrong. What is the scope of the board's duties? So typically the primary role of a board of directors is to set goals and provide direction. That's the goal. We're going to say what we're going to accomplish this year, 3 to 5 years, 10 years looking out. Are there formal roles for board members? Is there a secretary? What do they do? Is there a CFO? What do they do? Is there someone who just works on engagement? Write out their duties. This is starting to sound a lot like human resources management, but it's a good thing because we want people to have a clear understanding of their interrelationships and what they're bringing to the board. And it also helps people avoid those awkward conversations when we step on one another's toes. So another bit of legalese, you have to stay away from the trap of what's called ultra vires. Ultra vires literally means outside of your power. A board cannot act outside of its power. We hear lots of headlines of different senior executives getting these high payouts when the company is going down the tubes. How did this happen? And sometimes you'll have a shareholder lawsuit that says, oh, the board of directors acted ultra vires outside of their power to do this sort of payout. So it's important that whenever your organization wants to change something about their mission or their board of directors, that they talk to an attorney that's familiar with the board and their mission and compliance. On our next HR and MBA bingo card, we're going to say the word handbook, specifically employee handbooks. Board of directors should have a handbook. They should clearly understand what decorum is, how we're going to interact. Being inclusive doesn't mean having someone there present. It means facilitating their existence and as well as their utility. And this should be true for every member of the board, not just the person with a disability or the disabled person. We want to understand how to best use and increase our ROI, our return on investment, with board inclusion. Does the organization have a policy of providing accommodations to all stakeholders? With this presentation, we've attached 2 PDFs that should be ready for download. They are model examples of employee handbook policies that cover disability, as well as a checklist of things to consider specifically for the state of Iowa. consider including these things and creating your own employee handbook because it creates uniformity and a place to look back for an objective standard if things go wrong. How do we measure success? Lots of different ways. Qualitative means fewer numbers, but it's more about satisfaction, shall we say? That's a very broad stroke. Is there a free or passive value in something that's hard to enumerate? Volunteer satisfaction, quantitative outputs. Is the inclusivity of the board improving return on investment? Are we reaching key performance indicators easier, faster, and more effectively? Is intake time decreasing or increasing? Are we improving the number of people we're helping? And is our customer base increasing? Going on with this, so quantitative, like we said, could be revenue, return on investment. Qualitative, let's consider the customer satisfaction. Customer, we usually consider that for-profit entities. Sometimes we say consumer for nonprofit entities. Either way, we're trying to make them happy with the services we're providing that are both crucial to them and also could be a little bit challenging for them to achieve. So therefore, we want them to be happy not only to ask for help, but to receive the help and then come back to us, because that's the true mission. Okay, what question should we ask before onboarding a person with disabilities? This is a deeper dive because this should have, all of these questions need to be asked prior to onboarding. So let's assume we've already asked ourselves, what are our goals that we're meeting well? What goals are we not meeting well? So in theory, it could be engagement, it could be consumer base. There can be so many different ways of considering what a goal is. Where is there opportunity for improvement? What must, should, could be changed about our organization that can be determined by the board of directors? What trends have you noticed within and outside your organization? Is your organization starting to age faster than your population? And this occurs a lot of times with legacy founders staying by and difficulty bringing in new people. Inclusion is a wonderful opportunity to collaborate between people who have institutional knowledge of an organization and those that understand the community more right now. So how will inclusion of disabled people actually empower the mission of the organization? Consider beginning to include people with disabilities as soon as possible. It should be there from day one. If you are not sure you already have a person with disabilities on your board, ask. Maybe they're a caregiver. Maybe you've only been acquaintances, or maybe they've been quiet, or maybe someone else has been talking too much about a different topic. But let's do a survey of people we already have on our board and hopefully notice if we should bring on someone. So we've collected data, we analyze our organization, its board of directors, its processes, all of these things. And when we include people with disabilities, it will help with problem solving. So we want to include many highly diverse stakeholders to help solve the issues that have been uncovered. So diverse perspectives, participation brings diverse perspectives. It's not so much that we're focusing on diversity, it's that we need to understand how to adapt. We need to adapt quickly. We have businesses now who change business models up to 4 times an hour. That's just on the for-profit side. On the nonprofit side, it's the red queen effect. We're just running on this treadmill, trying to stay alive. So what do? We're trying to look for ways to find synergies between people who have different assets, resource availability, and opportunities to bring to the organization. And how does that meld with what the organization already has? This case study blew my mind when I learned about it from a dear friend who is a quadriplegic. So the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 states that you have to provide some sort of changing table for an adult in a major, if you are a major airport hub, generally speaking. So here's the issue. If you are a quadriplegic, even if you have a caregiver, you are over the weight limit of, let's say, the koala care thing that comes off the walls, and that's meant for children. And it's also out in public. So what currently people have to do who are unable, who need assistance with mobility, they have to lay on the floor of an international airport bathroom. I've been told the goal is to get your hair closer to the wall by the drain because it's less dirty. Imagine that. So how dehumanizing is that for people? So the solution was adult changing tables that can be raised up and down with simple controls placed inside the handicap stall. So the real question is, how do you know which lift to buy and within which restroom to put it all into and all these different things? Well, that's still open for debate. The law doesn't say what you need to have in terms of what type you need in the bathroom. But the reason that this came up was because the FAA started including more people with disabilities into the conversation. They did not realize that people were facing this struggle. As we are facing what's known as the silver tsunami, about 11 weeks ago, the highest number of baby boomers the highest number of people in US history turned 65 in one day. We're going through this silver tsunami of people aging, of people that might need to use assistive equipment, mobility equipment. These issues are coming to light more and more. So you want your organization to stay ahead of the curve. So how inclusion could help your organization's success? Keep in mind that this law was created collaboratively and through a coalition. They worked very hard at trying to understand the basic question. The companies that were already producing these was, why aren't these selling themselves? Why aren't airports just doing this out of the goodness of their heart? And it turned out that the accommodations to be used were not at all understood. So what the organization had done was to incorporate a great number of people that represented the diversity of disabled people. So they not only had caregivers and disabled people that went to Congress and lobbied, they had veterans. They had former athletes and Paralympians. If you don't think you're capable of something because you're disabled, or you believe someone with a disability is incapable of something, of a feat, just think about this one thing. In Paris right now, there's an Iowan with no arms that is the best archer in the world, competing in Paris right now in the Paralympics. I don't know about you. I couldn't do that with my hands, let alone with my feet. Think about what an incredible opportunity that is for your organization to have them be a guest speaker, to have them bring their wisdom, and just to broaden the perspective of others. They also had elderly people that have lost mobility due to age, parents of adult children with mobility issues. Specifically with that, we've seen in grocery stores carts that have larger seats for adults or children with disabilities that are beginning to age. So they don't fit into a grocery cart anymore because they're 30. So we have these larger chairs. That took a lot of grassroots effort. And all of these people were naturally motivated to improve these things. So how did including disabled people help these boards of directors? The board members were part of the target community. They understood what they needed just as much as their community because they were part of their community. We want boards of directors to have a stake in the outcome. If they don't have a stake, brings people back to do anything. So it's a selfish thing, and it might be saying that someone has a selfish motivation, but at the end of the day, intrinsically, we want to feel valued. And if when we're a stakeholder, we feel more valued, and those people will also work harder on your boards of directors, for profit or not. Continuing on, we want to ask ourselves, why inclusion? Why do we need to have a broader understanding of things? Consider these questions. Will it increase client consumer base of the organization? This is crucial as we have more and more people competing, higher competition. American companies, European companies used to dominate everything. We now have companies from emerging markets that are becoming competition. How do we figure out then how to increase our consumer base? Disability inclusion could be one of those opportunities for that. Will it improve our public image? This is not to say rehabilitate a public image or to create tokenization, but how could our public image become a method for people to want to engage with us more? We see something similar between what they're putting out there and who we are. Will assist with grant compliance, Title VII compliance. All these things are important and should be considered. Will it increase volunteer employee engagement? That's very important. There are people who will tell you their lives have been changed because they've worked with somebody, not only with a disability, but someone who brought a new perspective into their lives. I just want to take a minute and say that I am grateful for all the people at the Harkin Institute who put together these masterful slides as we were doing this and worked so hard to bring this program together. Before our call to action, I would like to read the course code in its entirety. The course code is 413202. This is a 1 credit for a 1 hour CLE for diversity credit. 413202. So what is the call to action? We've learned all this. We're persuaded. Let's include people with disabilities and disabled people because there is a value there we are not tapping into. Let's do this. How do we do this now? Call to action. Engage with your board members. Tell them, you have to see this presentation. Read through some of these statistics. Did you know it? I didn't know about any of these things. Bring your enthusiasm to your board. Ask questions. Poke them, prod them. Say, hey, don't you have a loved one who might be part of this target audience? Do you have any input or experience? And it's not to be an instigator, but it's to get them to start thinking about, oh, I didn't realize that my loved one could be a potential consumer. Have a plan for engagement to prevent tokenization. This is very important so the person that is brought in does not feel like the only person in the room. It can be extremely intimidating to be disabled, let alone being the disabled person. To finish out the MBA card there of bingo, I'm so sorry, but I have to bring up SMART goals. It is important whether or not you use a KPI system, whether or not you are trying to reach certain thresholds, certain important goals. SMART goals are a very easy way for everyone to get onto the same page of trying to figure out how inclusion can be useful for the organization. As always, gain board buy-in. When people think it's their idea and not yours, they're more interested in pushing it forward. So if it means not taking credit for it, who cares? The outcomes are the same. Let other people take credit for it. But board buy-in is so important. And this has to go with the politics of every board is unique. Some people don't have to try as hard. Some people do. But get buy-in from everyone. And with this, Thank you so much, everyone. We've covered so much information. If you have questions about any statutes, any applications, I'll try and answer your questions. Daniel, as well as the other incredible staff of the Harkin Institute, can also provide answers. And so we encourage your engagement with this conversation. I'm just going to check if there are any questions online. And with that, I want to encourage you once again to email us with questions, ideas, specific questions to your organization, and also considering, of course, joining the mailing list, become a member of the Harkin Institute, as well as considering donating to the wonderful opportunities here at the Harkin Institute. Thank you everyone for coming today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Recording and do questions. All the slides.
I got